Within weeks of this home video being taken, the person on the phone would become the subject of one of Ireland's most infamous missing persons cases.
This case stunned the population of Ireland. It was grotesque in every aspect.
I would say Annie was a victim of a serial killer and certainly a psychosexual killer.
A beautiful, vibrant and intelligent young American woman had come to regard Ireland as her second home.
She was well capable of minding herself. She was streetwise, but she did have an idyllic view of Ireland, and she loved the culture, the music, the chat, the crack, everything about that. And somehow it seems that she fell prey to the very worst type of person in this country.
On the evening of March 26, 1993, somewhere between Dublin and the Wicklow Mountains, she disappeared. There are more than 3,000 unsolved murders and tens of thousands of missing people in the UK and Ireland. I'm criminologist Donal McIntyre, and in this series I've brought together an unrivaled team of specialist investigators. Together we'll work with the original detectives to re-examine the evidence, and hopefully we'll bring some fresh information to light and bring some closure for the friends and family of the victims of some of the most shocking and impenetrable cold cases. In this programme, the extraordinary disappearance of Annie McCarrick. We retrace the last days of the popular student. We meet people who knew her. We review the old evidence and bring some new thinking in a desperate effort to find out what really happened to Annie. Annie McCarrick literally vanished on a March evening, just like any other March evening, and has not been seen or heard of since.
The disappearance of Annie McCarrick is a defining crime of the 1990s. In terms of Annie McCarrick's disappearance, given all the factors, that she was an only child, that she came to Ireland to make Ireland her home, that she was trusting, that she loved everything about Ireland, and not in a twee way.
What's most unusual about this disappearance is the complete lack of motive by anyone involved in the social group of this very popular American student, and the fact that she could simply go for a walk and never come back. My cold case team and I are hoping to shed some new light on the disappearance of Annie McCarrick. By re-examining the circumstances surrounding her disappearance, revisiting the places where she was last seen, and by reviewing some of the witness statements of the time to see what the investigators might have missed. My team of specialist investigators have looked at and helped solve many crimes. But the case of Annie McCarrick, like many unresolved cases, needs just that one piece of the jigsaw to help move the investigation forward. Even after all these years, there's still a chance of some new evidence emerging, including the possibility of IRA involvement. For retired Assistant Commissioner and Senior Detective Martin Donlan, this journey has been made before. He has been part of many murder investigations and was part of the original team which investigated the Annie McCarrick case. Clive Driscoll is a former Detective Chief Inspector with Scotland Yard. He has led many noted investigations over the course of his 40-year career. He's seen many cases like this one and understands its complexity. In addition, I've also enlisted the help of noted crime journalist Nicola Tallant. Nicola has written on many high-profile cases in the course of her career and has a detailed knowledge of this case.
She fell in love with the country, she had Irish roots.
I'm fairly confident that she got on that bus.
She was very impressed by his absolute Irishness.
Where do we go from here? We're hoping that by re-examining and re-evaluating the evidence amassed over the years, we can go some way to finding the key to this mystery. Annie McCarrick was just 19 when she first arrived in Ireland. Her family had roots in the country, and it had been her dream to study there. She valued her connections with Ireland. Her father, John, a former New York police detective, had nurtured this in his daughter, and Annie had been keen to study in Ireland since her early teens.
She went over and she went to St. Patrick's, the Teachers' College, but she switched from there to Maynooth, and she just loved it. Just loved it. She came home every summer and for Christmas, and we would go over 2 or 3 times a year. She's the one that pulled all the roots out. Went and saw my wife's relatives, my relatives, and she established this huge network. And by the time my wife and I got over there, I felt that we were going back home, a really strange feeling. Every day I would drive her to school, and she would tell me how she couldn't wait to get away from here and get a new life, and she was tired and bored of it.
Her great-grandfather and grandmother came from Ireland originally, and on her dad's side there was great links with Ireland as well, and she just seemed to love that. She loved being part of Irish culture and heritage, and she really felt part of it.
She arrived back in Dublin, having previously been in the country for 3 years, completing a degree in Irish literature at Maynooth University, just south of Dublin. At Maynooth, she'd made plenty of friends and had been a popular student. Here is where she found a small apartment to live. It's in the quiet South Dublin suburb of Sandymount.
There was an affluent area, Sandymount. It's in Dublin 4. It's on the south side. It just straddles along the coast road. Few shops, few pubs, few churches, of course, and all of that. A little square, and you know, there was people who lived in flatland there. But it was a great commuter belt because it's right beside Dublin. It's right beside the Dart station, which is the electric trains that run in and out of Dublin. Very good area to commute, generally all around, and it was a nice place to be able to live, or even to be able to afford to live.
Annie's flat was small but cosy, and she and her flatmates hosted small dinner parties and gatherings with friends. This is the apartment building where Annie lived in the weeks and months leading up to her disappearance. An average, unremarkable building. But what was going on inside here that would make a beautiful, seemingly happy young woman vanish? The truth probably is that she never intended to go anywhere. The question then is, who was behind her disappearance? By late spring, Annie had settled back into life in Ireland, and although things appeared to have been going well, tensions had built up between herself and her father, who'd wanted her to return back to the United States. In fact, it's clear that John McCarrick had never wanted her to come to Ireland in the first place.
I was very upset at this, very upset. I guess it was one of the biggest family crises we've had. She wanted to go back to Ireland, and I was dead set against it. I thought she should get on with her life.
He couldn't even go to the airport when Annie left New York, went to JFK Airport to come back to Dublin. It was her mother who went to the airport. Her dad, John, just couldn't face the airport goodbye. So he said goodbye at the family home in Bayport. And both John and Nancy missed her greatly.
You know, I thought she was at a high educational level and had time enough to do the flitting about that she loved to do. But off she went.
Within months of her arrival, she had vanished. And her disappearance sparked one of the most significant investigations in Irish criminal history. Was she murdered and dumped somewhere by a stranger or by someone she knew? That's what I'd like to establish.
It is possible that the killer somehow knew her, and it may have been a chance encounter down around Enniskerry. We can't rule anything out.
The clue to her disappearance could equally lie amongst the leafy cloisters of Maynooth University. Annie had grown close to a number of people here, and going back over 20 years, the campus was a much smaller and more tightly knit community than it is today.
She was one of the American students. And I always found them very interesting students because they were outgoing. And Anna was particularly outgoing and very trusting, I thought. I thought she may have an idealistic view of Irish people and Irish society.
Does that innocence to her naivety as an American abroad, in love with Ireland, did that make her particularly naive, innocent, vulnerable?
Well, maybe trusting. You know, maybe trusting of people too trusting, and this sort of belief that Ireland was so safe and you could go walking in the mountains on your own. I mean, women should really not go walking in the mountains on their own in such an isolated place. But when you're away sometimes, or you're away from your own environment, you do feel safer and you take risks.
Or is it here in Sandymount that she met or was in contact with someone who was instrumental in her disappearance? So why would a well-adjusted, seemingly happy student go missing? What might have been going on in her life? And what happened that fateful evening she was last seen heading towards the Wicklow Mountains? Coming up, the hours and days surrounding Annie's disappearance, her final movements, and the man who identified her on the night she went missing.
In the
College student Annie McCarrick mysteriously disappeared while out walking in the hills south of Dublin. No trace of her has ever been found. Despite an extensive manhunt and a wide-ranging investigation, police are still no closer to establishing with any degree of certainty what happened to the 26-year-old American. Now I'm hoping that by working with seasoned investigators and my cold case team, who've agreed to reevaluate the evidence and events surrounding Annie's disappearance, that we'll be able to take a fresh look at the case, which has remained unsolved for over 2 decades. The day of Annie's disappearance, a Friday, her roommate Jill Toomey left for work at about 10 to 9. It was the last time she would ever see her friend. About 2 hours later, Annie went to the Quinnsworth supermarket store just up there on the right, now since rebranded as a Tesco's. Annie bought a couple of bags of shopping from the supermarket, which is just a few hundred yards from her apartment. She also went to this branch of AIB here on the corner, where we know she was caught on CCTV, and spent some time switching her account from another branch elsewhere in the city.
So she goes to the AIB. That is the last footage of Annie McCarrick, those images of her standing in the queue to go up to the counter and just make an arrangement to change the bank branch from Clondalkin to Sandymount.
We also know she made a number of phone calls from this phone booth here in Sandymount Green.
She rang a friend, Anne, to ask her would she like to go for a walk that afternoon, and Anne said no, she had hurt her ankle and she couldn't make it. So that's where we know that Annie had a plan, an intention to go walking, and that she had said she was going to go as far as the Dublin Mountains.
So there was nothing to indicate anywhere along the line that perhaps she might do some harm to herself or that she was troubled in any way, because she had made future plans.
So what were her plans for that day? Because in those plans must lie some clue to her disappearance.
She was alone that day, and her family were back in the States. Her mum was going to come the following Friday. She was off work that day. She had said she might call in and collect her wages that she hadn't been able to collect the previous day, but she didn't do it. Everything about that day was kind of normal. There was nothing to indicate any particular special arrangement that she had for that day, any private meeting that she might have had, maybe that night with anybody. There's no trace of anything like that, no plan, no note in a diary, no phone call that we know she made in any way like that. We know she had plans for the following day for 2 friends to come around for dinner. So perhaps that she was looking forward to the weekend, and that Friday, although it was her birthday, was maybe a down day for her, that there was nothing else going on, and she was more maybe looking ahead to the weekend and then the following week when her mum was going to come over.
By 3 o'clock, she was back here at her apartment, but she left nearly as soon as she arrived, leaving her shopping in the bags.
Who knows what was going through her mind? I mean, perhaps we all do things like that we stick a bag on the ground and say, I must sort that out in a few minutes, and then something else distracts you.
Then witnesses saw her get the 44 bus, which was bound for Enniskerry, in the foothills of the Wicklow Mountains, just outside Dublin. There was a trigger point for her to leave in a hurry, her perishables on the table. And that seems to me, that trigger point must have pointed to some rendezvous. I mean, what stands out for you in that event?
Exactly what you said. In fact, there was perishables. It should have gone in the fridge. It struck me she wanted to make that bus, and I understand that bus runs, I think it's every hour, but she certainly wanted to make that bus, and that was enough for her to leave the house very quickly. Everything that I've read about this case, all the research I've done suggests to me that she was meeting someone that day and that she hadn't gone there by chance just to walk alone. Everything points to the fact she had a rendezvous with somebody that she was going to meet.
She did try and get a friend to go with her, and she made a phone call and the friend said she wasn't available. So, you know, at that point, did she ring somebody else? Did she... She was in a rush. She wouldn't leave the shopping. It takes you 2 minutes to put it away in the fridge. So she was running for the bus. It was 3 o'clock. You know, at that point of the day, I think it's a strange place to go anyway. It's far away, it's up the mountains, like when she has the beach there beside her.
I agree. It's almost as if that was the journey she wanted to make. Now, yes, it could have been that she wanted to walk in those beautiful mountains, but it also suggested to me that she was going somewhere to meet someone.
So why did Annie go to Enniskerry? Could it have been as innocent as a late-night walk? Whatever the reason, she was never seen again. The last time Annie was seen with certainty was that afternoon. There are some possible sightings of her that night in Johnnie Fox's pub and in the picturesque village of Enniskerry, which we'll be investigating further.
She was having a birthday party. She had invited friends round for her birthday party, but maybe if she was meeting this man, she hadn't invited this man to her birthday party, or whoever she met. And that suggests to me that that's somebody maybe in her life that she wasn't able to or didn't feel comfortable at the moment to bring into her circle of friends. So you could ask if it was a meeting that she'd planned so that maybe nobody would have seen her out there because it was in the early stages of a relationship. Because she was having a birthday party. The following day, she had arranged to cook food. She could have invited that friend, whoever it was in the mountains, to come to that party.
Johnnie Fox's pub is situated in Glencullen in the Dublin Mountains. It's the highest pub in Ireland at 920 feet above sea level. It's a traditional Irish pub and a mecca for tourists, particularly Americans. Former Assistant Commissioner Martin Donlan and I are visiting Fox's. He previously came to the pub within hours of Annie being reported missing. But there's something about a missing, student case, a missing woman's case, right? Because of this essence of that vulnerability and also the terrible fear that it's a sexual crime.
Well, everybody...
And a monster's in our midst. There's a monster somewhere, isn't there?
Absolutely.
Sam Dorn was part of the security staff here in Johnnie Fox's on the night that Annie disappeared. He reported seeing her in the company of a man with an athletic build, around 5'9", 5'10", in his late 20s, with brown hair and broad shoulders. Now, many people believe this was the man responsible for her disappearance. Who was he? What was he doing with her? And did they leave together?
On that night we were here in the door working, and the girl, she came in there and she strolled over, just about over there. And at that stage I just caught her by the arm and I said, sorry, look, there's a cover charge in here. At that stage she stopped and she looked in her bag like as if she was looking for money, but it wasn't like as if she was going to get money. It was more like a gesture for the gentleman behind to pay. But she seemed to be appearing across the room like as if she was looking for somebody. So at that stage the chap behind, he said, I'll get that. And he stepped forward, and as he stepped in there, he had a pint in his left hand. He put it over there on that counter, and he took money out of his right hand pocket, and he paid the cover charge for the two of them. And the chap was wearing a wax jacket. He seemed about 5'8", 5'10", squarish face, clean shaven, tightish hair. I would say flat-chested, square shoulders, looked like a lad that was fairly fit, you know. And then at that stage, then once they had paid, they proceeded over across the far side of the room, and we didn't see them leave at the end of the night, like, you know, with a full house here.
Investigators believe the man looked something like this and issued this photo fit at the time.
He would have been seen by a large number of people on that night because he was in her company, and some witness did describe this guy. Was he local? If he was local, the risk is even greater, isn't it? But unfortunately, in this case, the risk in his mind was worth it.
That's where we had the last known sighting of Annie that we could start to make inquiries from. But it seemed that she was with somebody at that time.
But is this eyewitness account enough for my cold case team to presume that Annie was in fact in Johnnie Fox's that night? Are we assuming too much? Did Annie ever make it to Johnnie Fox's, or indeed even to Enniskerry?
Everything about her disappearance was suspicious.
We do know she took the bus in the afternoon. It's the period after that and some sort of confirmation that she was in fact in the pub that I'm looking for.
So you had somebody saying someone's getting on a bus which goes in the direction of the pub, and someone at the pub also believed they saw the same person. You have to look at that in a slightly stronger light than if it was just single people saying it.
The eyewitness account came from a friend of hers. She saw her on the bus.
Good account.
Good account. We can take that as plausible. And from then on, we're really at sea.
Yeah, I mean, that's a very strong witness. If you know somebody, you're sure that it's them. Whereas the witness in the pub, while he's never changed his story and very adamant that it was her, never had seen her before. So,
and I have to say, you have to believe in witnesses, and the witness hasn't changed his story, hasn't added to it, hasn't detracted from it, hasn't moved from it. So you have to have confidence that unless there's a very good reason, you have to have confidence that they're trying to help you and they're trying to give information to your investigation. I think sometimes we actually look very, very deep when, you know, you can accept people's words. I mean, I haven't read, seen, or no one's told me anything which suggests that he would make up a story for any reason. He hasn't benefited from it. So you have to believe in a witness trying to help you as much as they can.
If Annie was abducted or murdered, then the mountains south of Dublin, a deserted and vast expanse of uninhabited land, is one of the many places where her body could be buried.
It's extremely wild terrain. The police may have looked at one or two places, but you couldn't for all time. You could be digging and digging there and find absolutely nothing. It's a perfect hiding place for a body.
But is that what happened to Annie McCarrick that night? Coming up, was there a sexual motive in Annie's disappearance? And did a 48-hour delay in reporting her as a missing person allow the perpetrator to cover his tracks?
Card, UEFA Champions League sponsors.
Dublin-based American student Annie McCarrick disappeared after going for a walk one evening. Her body has never been found. The last reported sighting of the 26-year-old was in Johnnie Fox's pub in Glencullen in the mountains outside Dublin. My cold case team and I believe she likely met a grisly end that night. The music would have ended in the pub at closing time. But what happened afterwards? Our cold case team believes she met somebody here for a drink and to listen to some music. Was he the last person to see her alive? Doorman Sam Doran is emphatic that he saw Annie that night.
Trying to pay, but she seemed to be appearing across the room like as if she was looking for somebody.
If you accept the statement from the doorman as being true, if we say, well, on the balance of probabilities, that is Annie McCarrick, where do we go from here?
Well, I don't think she would have gone to the pub on her own and then was followed in by somebody who paid her entrance fee, because she was a student. She was living on a part-time job wage. She was paying her rent. She wouldn't have had the kind of money. you have to kind of accept, if you accept that, you have to accept she'd met somebody, gone for a walk with somebody, and went into the pub with this person who paid for her entry fee. So she was therefore having a relationship, presumably with somebody. Everyone has secrets. It's very possible.
And it could have been in the infancy of a relationship, couldn't she? It could have been a couple of times they've met, and she wasn't ready to introduce her to the wider group of friends. And but that, for me, was reasonably significant, that whoever, if we accept she met someone, they weren't going to come to what was an already organised party that she's going to have for friends, which one would have assumed if it had been a longer-term relationship, maybe they would have got an invite, maybe.
On the other hand, Nicola, I bring to you is a sense, to what extent, if this was a relationship, to what extent might it have been a forbidden relationship, and that's where the jeopardy is?
Well, possibly. Now, she did ask another friend to go for a walk with her, which is the only thing that I feel is a bit, so what did she do then? She said no, and then she rang some guy. It's an unknown, and in every investigation, sadly, you have unknowns. But I actually do agree with you 100%. I don't believe, knowing everything I know about her, that she would have just gone into the pub or gone to the pub on her own. I can get round that she'd gone for a walk on her own, but I do have to come back to when I watched the interview, I actually felt that that was someone trying to help the investigation, not trying to bring attention to themselves. And so from that moment, if I accept to myself that that was Annie, that what he seemed to be sure it was, then I had to accept the person behind her knew him.
By the evening of Saturday, the 27th of March, just 24 hours after the last alleged sighting of her, there was already concerns for Annie's welfare.
Her friends, Hilary and Rita, arrive out in Sandymount that Saturday night to be fed, looking forward to this dinner that Annie has been talking about. But there's no answer at the door. And they ring, no answer.
By Sunday evening, Annie's family back in the United States were so concerned that her mother, Nancy, changed her travel plans and flew to Ireland overnight.
It goes into the Monday, and it's on the Monday then that things start to really move forward, because again, there's no trace of Annie. When she arrives in early in the morning, straight to Irishtown Garda Station and reporting the fact that her daughter is missing, and it's extremely out of character.
The report was made at Irishtown Station. Just at the counter, people walk in and say they were concerned. In this case, our concerns were raised more or less immediately, but based on what we had found out as a result of the report, as a result of her state of mind, as a result of her plans and all of that. This was a person who was getting on with life, had made plans, and something must have gone wrong, and that's where we worked from.
From that initial reporting of her as being a missing person at Irishtown Garda Station, it moves up the chain quite quickly within the Gardaí.
So that report was taken, and immediately it was given to the detectives who were based in Irishtown. And the alarm was raised more or less straight away, because this was unusual. Basically, when you take a report of a missing person, you will find within a very short time of investigating the report on itself that there's an underlying problem somewhere, and that will bring you to a certain direction in relation to your inquiries. In this case, we hadn't got that. So the alarm was raised, the detectives were brought in.
However, I'm concerned that the delay in reporting her disappearance may have given Annie's perpetrator a head start.
It kicked off very quickly, but the problem was the fact that she had disappeared on the Friday, and it's on the Tuesday that Gardaí really start to investigate this case once it's reported to them. The killer has all that weekend not only to have hidden Annie, but also to have covered his tracks and to have perhaps started concocting an alibi, started fudging it with people. Didn't you see me whenever? Or creating this illusion that he has been around when maybe he wasn't around in certain places on that Friday. So the Gardaí are hamstrung from the start.
At Sandymount Beach, close to Annie's apartment, Martin Donlan tells me about the early days of the investigation. Now, on her family, I mean, her father, you talked to her father, John.
I did,
you liaised with him. I mean, how did they engage with this terrible trauma they were going through? Father was an ex-police, was an ex-Parks policeman.
Yeah.
So he must have feared for the worst, even in the early days.
Indeed, he did. And he was very anxious to know what direction the investigation was going in. We got sightings of Annie McCarrick all over the country. It got a lot of exposure on crime line programmes and
false flags.
And they were all checked out as far as was physically possible.
In fact, the case received so much publicity that inevitably numerous misleading theories were put forward by members of the public.
A lot of people would be genuine in their sightings, but she was reported in Donegal to Wexford. And Gardaí had to follow all those particular sightings.
People did come forward like clairvoyants on a regular basis, and they would come and they would ring the station, the investigation team, and they would say that I know exactly where Annie McCarrick is buried because they would indicate it on a map.
Anything with an American woman with an American accent, fitting the description of Annie, perhaps 5'8", wearing a tweed coat, jeans and cowboy boots. There were descriptions of women like that, where people were trying to do the right thing perhaps, but it brought Gardaí away from Dublin, away from Wicklow. They had to follow all those particular leads.
There was extensive searches done all around the area of Johnnie Fox's and between Johnnie Fox's and Enniskerry, and all the roads leading out of Enniskerry. There was physical searches done 100 yards back from the road on both sides of the road, and there wasn't a trace of any of her clothing being found, or her boots, or anything else that she was wearing on the night. And there was no trace ever found, unfortunately, of her body if she came to, but all the indications are that she was in Johnnie Fox's.
So there appears to be no doubt that what happened in Johnnie Fox's, the hugely popular tourist pub in the mountains outside Dublin, holds the key to Annie's fate. It's the last place she was seen, and it appears to offer a number of possibilities about a man Annie may have met up with that evening. Coming up, an extraordinary new line of inquiry and the possibility that Annie may have fallen victim to subversive criminals and the IRA. College graduate Annie McCarrick disappeared mysteriously while walking in these hills south of Dublin. No trace of her has ever been found. She was a happy and attractive young woman with everything to live for. It's an extraordinary story, and my cold case team and I have spent months re-examining and reviewing all the evidence in the case. Looking at the facts now, do my experts have a clearer picture of the reasons behind Annie's disappearance? If she was murdered, and it came from that pub, from a relationship, what was the motive?
You've got a very attractive young lady that's come from a pub. My presumption would be it was a sexual motive. And once then you've got either it took place in the frenzied attack, or you've now got a witness to a sexual assault, and therefore the witness has been disposed of. So the motive for me, based on what I've known, and obviously there was a history, sadly, of other offences of a similar ilk at the time, would be a sexual motive, and then sadly the lady either lost her life during the sexual attack or after the attack to prevent a witness from going to the police.
I absolutely agree. I think this was definitely a sexually motivated attack. I think she was murdered by an individual she was with. She'd left the car park with them in a car, and whatever happened, she either refused the advances or a row broke out and she was murdered. Unfortunately, some people have skill sets to bury bodies, to get rid of bodies, and this individual would have had quite a few days to do that.
Having re-examined the case, what can we now say about the disappearance of Annie McCarrick on Friday, March 26th, 1993? And what can my team say about the man who took her from Johnnie Fox's? The man now at the centre of our investigation. The man who may have taken her life.
Well, the answer is that I think studies show that people tend to start with minor sexual type crimes and then gradually work up to the serious stuff. As unpalatable as that may be, there are people that are quite capable of killing someone and hiding the body. I think in this case, the fact that there's been no trace, there were no clothing found. I watched a police officer saying they'd searched the area quite well and no clothing, no shoes. So for me, this is somebody that sadly probably has killed again, and I understand there was a series of young ladies going missing, so I think there probably was, in this case, it would fall more towards someone who has done it before than someone who's just starting out.
It may well have been a sexual motive in this crime, because we know from other cases that normally in Ireland the motive would seem to be a sexual assault or rape or an intent to rape. If it was a chance encounter with somebody, that would seem to be the most likely scenario, that Annie may have been subjected to some form of assault before then being murdered. And this is something that her family have had to endure and live with and dwell upon in some way. They know that. They've known that from day one.
An alternative theory which has come to our attention suggests that paramilitary operatives may have been involved. Within the Irish context, we've looked at the disappeared and IRA burying bodies, gone missing, and there is that particular skill set. Now, this skill set has come into this investigation by very odd means.
It is still part of the investigation that an IRA man on the run was in the pub that night and was talking to Annie, and that she was very impressed by his absolute Irishness. So they got chatting and he was very impressed to be impressing her. But talked too much and told her too much, went out to the car, realised that he had done this, killed her, dumped her body and went back to his safe house where he was living at the time in Dublin, and following morning in the cold light of day realised he had to actually bury that body properly. And obviously he did have the skill set for that, as did people around him. Now, an individual has told the Gardaí that this happened, and that he went back up the following day to the mountains with other members of the IRA, and that they buried her.
Now, what's interesting about this is that it's an alternative motive. The motive wasn't necessarily a sexual motive. The motive was the fact that he'd over-disclosed, and that was why he had to kill Annie McCarrick. It's a slight deviation, or...
Well, you see, that was the story that he told. Yeah. So it doesn't necessarily mean that that was the truth. People, you know, it probably was a sexual thing, but he was coming back to his safe house, and he was telling the others that this is why he killed her.
This is now looking a little more credible. In the absence of all other clues and lines of inquiry, this is looking very strong.
And the individual who was named to the guards went on to move back up to the north, where he was involved in a sexual attack and was sent off to America by the IRA. Exiled.
If the IRA were involved, it throws a whole new light onto the case, particularly considering that organisation's efforts to hide its past misdemeanours, in particular in recent years to distance itself from the sex crimes perpetrated by its members. But is this line of inquiry plausible?
These guys are risk takers, basically, at their heart. So there's an element of imprisoning and controlling the victim. I don't think it's sufficient for those type of killers just to rape them and leave them. There's an element of sadism involved in it. And unfortunately for the families of those victims, it's an awful thought. What will haunt them for their lives is what exactly happened to their daughter in that particular space of time.
It's over 20 years since Annie McCarrick went missing. Her disappearance shocked the nation and had a profound effect on the public, both here and abroad. Everything that I've learnt about the case tells me that she was dumped unceremoniously in these hills, a fate that's believed to have fallen a number of other missing women before her. Could it be that my cold case team is correct, that a ruthless member of the IRA killed her and then disposed of her in this area? This is something that the Irish police need to look at in detail.
A few of them have been found, but only by the dint of the help of nature, where the body is exposed because of weather conditions and stuff like that. In other words, chance findings. But a practiced serial killer or psychosexual killer would be able to find a spot and bury the body deep enough where it would never be found.
Annie McCarrick had her whole life ahead of her when she disappeared. She was only 26 years old. She had plans to be a teacher. She was seeing if Ireland would be her long-term home. She had lived here for a number of years. She was forward-looking, and all that was taken away from her. I think this case will only be solved in one of two ways. Either the killer being caught, exposed by somebody who knows them, who suspects them, or that person themselves making a confession, or by the chance discovery. that perhaps someday up in the mountains somebody's walking on a particular track and the soil gives way, that there's some indication that there is a body in a particular location. With evil people and the people who get away with it for a long time, they don't have a look about them that says, I am an extremely dangerous person. They don't have the eyes that betray what's really on their mind. These are people who are able to mask it, who can get by in society, perhaps quite intelligent people, perhaps have good jobs, but all the while they are hiding very dark secrets.
So who committed this murder? Having reviewed the case from all angles and with the help of my cold case team, I'm now convinced that Annie was killed by an opportunist, a perpetrator who had committed similar offences before. She didn't know her killer. It was simply a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. The IRA theory is a fascinating one, and if true, is another source of embarrassment to an organisation that has been rife with sexual scandals in recent years. Either way, a thorough re-evaluation of the case is necessary in order to bring closure to the Annie McCarrick story.